Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. It is Wednesday, right? Yes, it is. We are, as you could tell, it doesn't look like my normal environment that I present Mom at Home with you from. Actually, that's because we are at the Museum of Making Music. I am at the Museum of Making Music. Our guests today are in their respective homes here in Southern California, coming to you, and I am here because I am testing out. We are hosting a live virtual concert event with Carl Verheyen. Carl Verheyen will be here at the Museum of Making Music. We won't have an audience, but I will be here. I will be running sound for that event on the stage right here behind me, and we will be broadcasting it to everybody who reserves a ticket for that event. You can find those tickets at museumofmakingmusic.org if you want to attend that show. We're very excited about it. So I'm doing a little, making sure all the gears are spinning for that show coming up. I don't want everything to, fall apart, at the last minute. But we're doing a little testing, making sure it sounds good, making sure it looks good, all for everybody who's going to be attending that virtual concert on June 13th. Today, Mom at Home, we are very excited to be hosting and be talking about Dr. Carleen, well, we're not hosting Dr. Carleen Hutchins, but we're talking about Dr. Carleen Hutchins with one of our local experts, Joe McNalley, who is founder of the Hutchins Consort. And today we also have Dr. Jonathan Piper, who will be guiding that discussion. And I'm going to actually introduce you to Dr. Piper right now, and he can introduce you to Joe McNalley. Take it away, Jonathan. I'm getting a notification that we can't hear audio right now, so I'm actually looking at why that would be. Hold on one second. Let me figure out what is going on to the audio. I'm trying to pop it back to this, and I'm actually going to be listening to the YouTube stream to see and make sure. Hold on one second. I need to be able to hear what is going on myself. I apologize, everyone, because, yes, I moved everything. Okay, I can hear myself talking through YouTube right now. Can I hear from you, gentlemen? I can hear you fine, but I want to make sure our audience can hear you. Hold on, gentlemen. What is going on myself? I apologize, everyone, because yes, I moved.
Now I'm listening to myself talk to myself.
Okay, I can hear myself talking through YouTube right now. Can I hear from you, gentlemen?
I still can't hear your audio coming through. You know why? I know why. I know why. Okay. And when you move everything, it goes to the wrong spot. Speakers needs to be same as system. Okay. Can I hear from you guys again?
I still can't hear your audio coming through. You know why? I know why. I know why. Okay.
I apologize. Bear with me, folks.
It goes to the wrong spot. Speakers needs to be same as system. Okay. Can I hear from you guys again?
No. That's me talking to myself again. Yes, you can hear my computer speakers. The audience can hear my
Bear with me, folks.
can hear my my voice. I can see that Zoom is coming in through. This is fun. Isn't this fun? I could see that Zoom is coming in through that, but I can also see that.
That's me talking to myself again.
Yeah, now I hear myself talking to myself again. Technology. Yes, so true. So true. I apologize. This is.
Can hear my voice. I can see.
Can you guys give me another test signal? And I know why. Okay, I apologize. Again, I figured it out. Okay, gentlemen, we are good to go.
Alrighty. So, let's replay that bit exactly, Joe. So I was talking about how great you are. You were talking about how great I am.
Yeah.
So skipping past all of that stuff.
Okay, good.
Yeah, get the formalities out of the way. So Hutchins consort. So tell me what a consort is, because that sort of helps to frame the entire conversation.
Yeah. So a consort in the original meaning of the word means a matched group of instruments or of voices. And this was the primary aim of music in the Renaissance, to have different matched sets of instruments. So there's two kinds of consorts. There's a real consort, like the Hutchins consort that is all matched groups of instruments. And then there was another kind of consort, which was called the broken consort, where you have unmatched groups of instruments. Now, in today's parlance, we tend to use the word consort to mean any kind of a band, but that is not actually what the original meaning of the word is. So the Hutchins consort is an actual consort. Most groups that call themselves consorts are actually what would have been called a broken consort.
Okay, so I see a violin on the shelf behind you. I know that the Hutchins consort features an array of violins, but my brain immediately goes to, well, hang on, I thought, a string ensemble would qualify as a matched group of instruments, but I suspect that you're going to tell us something different from that. So maybe tell us a little bit about Dr. Carleen Hutchins, how she worked with or against the concept of a matched ensemble, and how we arrive at a set of instruments called the violin octet.
Yeah, well, Carleen's first instrument was actually trumpet. And then she was asked to join a string quartet, and they didn't really want a trumpet player, so she took up viola. She decided, violas were too expensive to buy in the early, I guess this was mid 1940s. So she decided she was, a fine woodworker. She would just make one. And of course she did. And so she made this fine instrument. And then one of the main experts on the acoustics of violin acoustics, Dr. Frederick Saunders, happened to be at a party where they were celebrating. And he looked at it and he said, I would really like you to make more instruments for me. She hadn't really been thinking about it, but she got into making instruments and making experimental instruments. And then in 1957, Pulitzer Prize winning composer Henry Brandt approached her, and he'd been reading about all the different science advances that she and Dr. Saunders had been making. And he approached her with the idea of fixing the strings. And like me, she hadn't really considered that problem, but it is in fact the case that unlike, say, flutes or saxophones or ophicleides, I don't really know if there's an ophicleide family, but I'd like to think there was one. But unlike those matched instruments, there was no matching group of strings, and the reasons for that go way back to the Renaissance, and that the physics of string instruments are very complicated, and even these brilliant makers like Stradivarius and Amati did not actually know how to make matched strings. So even though Amati was working in the Renaissance, his string instruments are fantastic instruments, but they don't actually match each other. And so
could we take a second and just talk about what it means for string instruments to match?
Sure.
What is it about a violin and a cello, which look fairly similar and obviously complement each other well in something like a traditional string quartet? Do those not match?
Okay. Well, the reason they don't match has to do with a couple of different factors, which have to do with the materials that they're made out of. All the instruments have spruce tops and maple backs and sides, and the length of the plate. So actually, I'm going to grab this. I don't want to turn my back to the audience, so let's see if I can do this. Oh, successful. Okay, so here's the belly of the instrument here, and here's the back. And this is a treble violin. It's a copy of one of Carleen's instruments. It's not actually one of hers. But the main thing is that you have to have this length. The length of the body has to match two different tones in the top and in the back, which need to match each other in order for it to sound like a violin. So you've got, it's a complicated geometry problem. And just because they didn't understand the physics, they weren't able to get it right, unlike with the viola da gambas, which match each other like pretty much automatically, even though they're another string family. They're softer, but they match each other really well. Violins, violas, cellos, and basses did not match each other. So the violin has a certain range that it plays that we tend to think of as in classical music as being pretty well perfect. The viola has that kind of deep, dark, it's a beautiful sound, but it doesn't penetrate the way a violin does.
Right.
The bass is like, and I apologies to all my fellow bass players, but the bass is like an inferior viola. And the cello, yeah, I mean, in terms of how it projects and everything.
That's some fighting words right there, Joe.
I know, and I love the contrabass. Don't get me wrong. And then the cello it's got that deep rib. It's quite a bit deeper, and that helps accentuate the lowest string, but it does so at the expense of the upper octave, where most cellists think they sound incredibly wonderful. But they're actually not getting that kind of power like a violin gets. I mean, the cello is a very warm human sound, but it does not match the violin. The viola, the cello, and the bass don't match it at all. So,
okay, so
these instruments do. Yeah.
Say that again.
But these instruments, the Carleen Hutchins octet instruments, all match a violin. So they're all violin in the ranges.
So how do you go from, okay, we have this issue, they're not matched. How do you then get to matching violins?
Well, that was more like the Manhattan Project than I think anybody had kind of anticipated. So Carleen was, of course, a brilliant scientist as well as being a brilliant artist. But she was also in a circle of people who were really fantastic minds about acoustics. And so they all started working on this problem together, and they formed this group called the Catgut Acoustical Society, which is a very whimsical name for a serious project. But the object of the Catgut Society was to find out what it is that makes a really fine violin a really fine violin.
Mhm.
And with that knowledge, then they were able to scale, to take, okay, we know what makes a great violin now. Then they could do the scaling theory of how do we make every instrument in the range sound like a violin, and how do we make up for those gaps that we have in Western music? Because we have the violin tuned G D A E, and the viola tuned C G D A just below it, and then we've got an octave missing between the cello and the viola, and then we've got an octave missing between the cello and the bass. So they decided, okay, we will also fill this in. And so Carleen worked primarily with, I think it was John Schelling of Bell Labs, who helped on the scaling theory. And she figured out the main thing, which was the plate tuning. But it was a lot of different people working together on different areas of acoustics, all led by Carleen to bring it all together.
Wow. Okay. So it's not just a matter of making it bigger.
No, if it was, then, I mean, there's a lot of really big basses out there.
Mhm.
A couple of years ago, I had a conversation with the great bass virtuoso Gary Carr, who was also an early proponent of Carleen's work. And he was talking about how whenever he goes to the orchestra, he always notices that a lot of people play these big basses and they just sound dull. Right? Now, you wouldn't think, you think bigger bass, that's going to sound great automatically, but it doesn't actually work that way. It's more, again, about that tuning of the top plate and the length of the plate. And then, of course, there's also how deep this dimension is as well. Those things have a gigantic effect. And you've, of course, heard the contrabass violin played. The thing is a monster. It's bigger than any of those big basses that sound dull.
Right.
But it's not just the size. You have to have the balance of those other acoustical elements, or you'll get that dullness.
Now, Joe, is it okay if I insert a question? How?
Of course.
Everybody knows I'm a percussionist and a drummer, so I have to kind of educate myself in different arenas. But how big is the largest of these instruments? Like, if I'm to imagine like size, I've seen the instruments before, and they remind me, the scaled violins. Oh, there's my camera cut out. The scaled violins that. They remind me similarly of a regular size violins, but they just get enormous, bigger and bigger and bigger. So what is the largest? What is the scale of the largest instrument on that? How big is that?
The largest instrument is over 7 feet tall with the end pin all the way in. So I can just barely touch the top of it. I'm exactly the average size of a human male around. And I'm the most average Joe you will ever meet.
Touche.
Yeah.
Very good.
Interestingly enough, so when we first got the instruments, we were like just checking out all the different sizes. The treble, the entire body fits in a perfect fit. So that range of notes is on the bass.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Wow.
So it's quite a difference between the smallest instrument and the biggest instrument.
That's pretty wild. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Carry on.
It's funny. I'm kind of having I'm feeling shades from our tuba conversation last week, where we were talking about the sizes of tubas and how there are a lot of people who prefer this big massive tuba, which ends up sounding really dark and kind of heavy. But then the smaller tuba is actually the one that can kind of get the higher frequencies out a little bit better and maybe project a little bit more effectively in an ensemble. So interesting parallels there between the discussions.
Yeah, well, it's the same set of physics everywhere in the universe, and you can't fight physics. We're stuck with the laws of nature we got.
Oh man!
For now, anyway.
Be so cool if you weren't, Bill.
Don't try to break the laws of physics. If there's one law you will get punished for, it's trying to break a law of physics.
Okay, so we have this concept of matching violins now, and you mentioned covering a range. What is the range, and how many matched violins does it take to fill that range?
Well, the idea of the octet was that with 8 instruments, you could fill the entire range of written Western music. So the contrabass is designed to be tuned C, G, D, A, an octave lower than a cello. In actual practice, most of them have been tuned E, A, D, G, just like a regular double bass in the orchestra. We also have a 5-string one, and when we use the 5-string one, we use it to play the low A on the piano, so that's the lowest note on the piano. The high E on the treble is an octave higher than the E on a regular violin, which is already a pretty high note. So the treble can actually play well past the highest note on the keyboard. And then, of course, when we use harmonics, we can go even way beyond that. But yeah, we can fill in, pretty much the entire range that an orchestra has with just the 8 instruments.
But you're saying a tuba can still play lower than the contrabass violin?
I'm never saying anything like that. I will not admit that, even if it's true. If we get Mark Dresser out, he can play those subtones, and instead of the 27.5 A, he could probably make it like a 13 A. And yeah, I know. No, I don't think the big tuba, the contrabass tuba, is a low instrument. But an interesting thing about that is that it's more about the pitch focus, the arrangement of the different overtones that make the tuba seem lower than, even when the tuba and the double bass play the same note, the tuba seems lower, and it's not that it's playing a lower note, it's just that we hear more of the partials, those harmonics of the double bass in the middle and upper range.
Well, and just to get really nerdy for a second, there are a lot of notes on the tuba where the fundamental pitch, that frequency isn't even particularly strong in the overall sound.
Yeah.
But our brains fill in the pitch because we are programmed to the harmonic series. So if there's a missing frequency in that harmonic series, our brains fill it in for us.
Yeah.
So if you have the upper end of the sound, your brain will still hear it as a low note because it anticipates the harmonic series.
Yeah.
So really fascinating bit, especially in low instruments where the instrument itself isn't necessarily making that super deep frequency. It's our brains doing the work for us.
Yeah. Yeah. For those of you who have working brains, but
I put mine through the paces. Hey, Joe, we have a couple questions. Is it okay if I pass along a few of those for you?
Absolutely.
It looks like, we have some really wonderful comments from, there's a guest today, Circuits and Things, to Mr. Stern, as just gushing about these instruments, and I appreciate all their comments. It's fantastic. But I wanted to know, what is the size of the treble instrument, and I'm gonna shoot these. Well, now let's just do one at a time. So, what's the size of the treble? Because we're getting a lot. I want to keep up with them.
Inches or millimeters?
Let's go imperial.
Okay, imperial running dog instrument. This one looks to be about 18.5 from stem to stern.
All right, very good.
And the string length, which is what everybody really wants to know. If I can get this, is 8 and a little under 3/4, 8 and just shy of 3/4.
All right. So if you're trying to replicate Dr. Carleen Hutchins' work, there you go.
You can get the plans.
You get the plans.
Yeah.
And then Joe asks, are the acoustics of I think this is a general question. Are the acoustics of a violin based on 440? I think that he is talking about Consort A standard tuning pitch. I don't know if we want to talk about standard tuning pitches, but if you want to talk about that just briefly, we can dive into that as well.
Sure. There's really 2 things that are wrapped up in there. One is that there was an agreement in I think it was the 1930s about what standard concert would be, and that was when it was decided that it would be 440. Wasn't some strange cabal. Back in earlier times, A was all over the place. And we think that for most of the violin family instruments, they were originally 415. And of course, the necks weren't raked back like this. They used to be flat. And the reason that Stradivarius is so well regarded is when they changed all those neck angles and everything, the Stradivarius has still sounded really great. Some of the other instruments that didn't take to the modernization really well, even though they were maybe even considered better at the time, like the Steiner violins. The other part of that question was it was tuning to the design of the instrument. So the actual pitch of the instrument, that is based on the violin design, and particularly of Stradivarius and Guarnerius, and they're the ones that took to the modernization the best. So that's one of the reasons that the overall design emanates from the golden period Cremona instruments. It is possible that you could make a consort based on any other tuning system, but it's not really so much the tuning as the relationship. So it's the relationship of each instrument to each other instrument is the same. I hope that answers it. So
that answers it for me. That puts it into a perspective. Let's see. Brian comments here, spruce seems to be the choice of soundboards or tops of acoustic instruments like guitars, but maple for the body. Were other woods used like rosewood, mahogany, and others? I don't. What materials? I might have missed it when you commented, or it wasn't commented. But what materials did Dr. Hutchins create these instruments out of?
Well, Dr. Hutchins actually experimented with a lot of different materials, and one of the things that she also did was make the first carbon fiber violin, way back, like 1971 or so. I mean, a long time ago. Back in the dawn of civilization. The traditional instruments are made out of maple for the back and sides, and spruce for the top. And it's because spruce has is really strong and yet really light. And a lot of it has to do with what's a formula called Young's modulus, which is how sound travels through a medium. And so spruce was known for probably thousands of years by the people who lived in Europe to be a great musical instrument wood. The ancients, before even any writing, were using these same materials to make things, and so it made sense when the violin first came to Italy that the Amatis would pick up the maple and the spruce. And different kinds of maple react differently. Just like with guitars, some people prefer guitar with a rosewood back. Those harder backs tend to push the sound a little bit crisper, I would say. But violins, as particularly the larger instruments, have been made with a variety of woods. Poplar gives you a little bit of a less, I don't want to say less focused, because there's some wonderful sounding poplar instruments, but the softer wood for the backs and sides. And so that's been used. But Carleen used the traditional violin making woods, even though she experimented with many kinds of wood.
Fantastic. I think that does a great job answering that question. And then one last one. I kind of already know the answer to this, and I think I'm going to break a lot of hearts out there. Is Susan? She asks, will Joe play for us? I don't know if we're going to be doing any concert performances today, Sue. Zoom is not quite the optimal choice for our sound, and I know, Joe, that you play the largest of the scaled instruments, and I don't know if we can fit that whole instrument in the frame, or if you even have it handy at your disposal. But I am sorry if you we're probably not going to be able to sample the instruments today, but I would highly recommend finding footage of the Hutchins Consort and locating some of their most recent clips, or even their historic clips. All their clips are really good and really do a great job of highlighting all the sonic frequencies that each of those scaled instruments does. So, Susan, I'm sorry, we will not be able to sample those instruments today. We're really kind of taking some time to talk about Dr. Hutchins and the work that she's done. But I appreciate that question. I just want to make sure we answer that for you. All right, take it away, guys.
So I kind of wanted to get back to this question of the harmonic series, the frequencies. So now that we've got our matched set of instruments, what changes in the way they play together? If you go from a string quartet to a violin octet, what are going to be the tonal differences?
That's an excellent question. So one of the things about having a matched group of instruments is that, unlike the traditional instruments, the overlap of the harmonics, because the harmonics are the same, you get a totally, and I know you've experienced this firsthand, but you get a totally different experience of the sonic field. And the consort with just the 8 instruments can sound like a much larger group because of those harmonics. One of the things that we discovered fairly early on was that just by using a treble or a soprano to play high notes, you get the effect of several violins, because when we mass, 20 violins in an orchestra, we start to get some of those harmonics poking out. Mm-hmm. And when you're actually just playing that note up here, it's like all of a sudden your brain goes right to, oh yeah, that's filling in that entire range right there. Huh. I mean, and in some ways, it's and Carleen was very clear about this. It's not that it's superior in a respect. I mean, to my ears, it's superior, but contrast can be really nice. It's nice to have the strange odd duck quality of the viola in a string quartet, and to have that mellow sound. We recreate that by different placement, by using different parts of the instrument that are darker and lighter in the arranging. So there's ways to get at those things.
Okay, great. Yeah, for everybody watching along at home, I would strongly encourage checking out some of those recordings, video or audio recordings. A lot of those high frequencies are exactly the kind of thing that would get eliminated on a transmission like this.
Unfortunately,
yeah. Please do check out one of those recordings, because it is really amazing. And of course, there's what's always kind of interesting to me is that there's a visual element to it, and I think maybe that's because the violin octet still seems a little unusual. Seeing a massive 7-foot bass, and then seeing what looks like a child's violin, but then hearing them played and something kind of clicks and it all makes sense. There's an interesting little moment there when you first encounter it. So my next question is, okay, so performing, the G. Burns Jug Band played with the Hutchins Consort, and I can imagine that was an interesting arrangement challenge, figuring out how to get an obviously unmatched group with a jug and a banjo and a violin with a matched group of violins, but sort of leaving those the sort of really weird ensembles out. How do you approach arranging for something like this? What is the music you play? Am I wrong in assuming that there's not a whole lot written for a violin octet?
Yeah, sadly, there's not that many pieces written directly for octet. When we got the instruments, we got, I think, about 4 or 5 pieces total. And now we've got close to 400 total pieces. So we've been asking composers to write for us. And of course, we've been doing lots of arrangements ourselves. Arranging for the jug band was just terrific fun. And I felt like I was getting to it too late, because when I'd asked Carleen 20 odd years ago what she'd most like to hear, she said, I really want to hear some ragtime played on these instruments. And then I finally did it and she'd already passed away. So, so if there's an afterlife, I hope she enjoyed it there. So when I'm looking at arranging an existing work, what I try to do is reverse engineer it. So like if I'm working on a Bach arrangement, I will literally copy every single note that Bach wrote and try to get into what I think his thought patterns were, and then think, how would he then approach arranging this for octet? And I do the same thing with the Tchaikovsky or Dvorak or any of those other warhorse pieces. When I'm writing myself, it's so much easier because I don't have to think about how some genius did it. I can just think, my little pea brain. Much easier than trying to rack my brain over somebody who was a lot smarter than me and how they would try to do things. But Henry Brandt said something to me that I think was really right on when we last saw him. And he passed away in 2013. So, which was that he thought that the sound of the octet would have been the sound that all of the great composers of the past would have preferred for writing as their instruments of choice for orchestral music, because of that evenness all the way across the range.
I'm following our chat here, and Mr. Stern is very passionate about suggesting an arrangement of Mark Breimer's "The Greatest Show" for octet, and he said it will rock, it's got to happen. So there's a suggestion for you. Better get started on that one. See what we can come up with it.
Yeah, thank you.
But I have a question. Is it okay if I ask a personal question on this one? Well, maybe not a personal question.
How personal is it?
Well, I mean, not that personal. But I've often thought, like, what was it the size of the instrument, or just scaling up the instruments? Because she stopped at the 7-foot, scaled up instrument. What was the next size past that? What would that look like? Why didn't she continue going? Was it just too much instrument to continue to work with? I would love to know kind of that process too. I didn't mean to hijack your conversation, but I just struck me. I was like, where would this end? What would the next iteration look like?
That's a really good question. The reason the instruments are scaled the way they are, there's a logarithmic scale that determines how big each instrument will be. And the 7-foot contrabass was as big as they thought a person, could play it. Now, for somebody like Mark Dresser, he's about 6'6", he handles that instrument just beautifully. For somebody who's 5'9" on a tall day now, like me, playing that contrabass is like an Olympic event. The next size up along that logarithmic scale would be really, really big. And keep in mind that the scaling theory, if you actually did it in a 1-to-1 scaling theory, the treble would be even smaller and the contrabass would be gigantic. So by putting it along that logarithmic scale, it squishes, it's like using compression in an audio recording. You squish it down so it's just to the point of physical limitation. And that's where that part of the scaling theory came from. Also, one of the reasons that the ancients couldn't really figure out why to do it. So, because that scaling theory is really tough.
Yeah, it sounds to me as if if she would have continued down that path, then you probably would have need, 2 or 3 people to play said instrument any bigger than what it had, like maybe a person, a string, or who knows.
Yeah.
Several people to hold the bow.
Yeah.
I understand now. Yeah, my mind is going down the path and just imagining the scale of that instrument. Thank you.
And instruments like that have been built. There's an instrument in Arizona that is a copy of the violin instrument, which, the idea was to make something that in the violin range that would sound with that power. And it's 12 feet tall. And there's a couple of them, I think in Montreal, a couple copies that are in Montreal, and the original's in the Paris Conservatoire in their museum. But yeah, I mean, you need bicycle pumps and a gigantic bow, and you don't get to play very fast on it. They do sound amazing. That's called the octabass.
That should be the name of my new band, the Octobass.
Yeah. And get the Octomom to be the lead singer. And then you're off to the races.
I can't follow you down this discussion. I can't go down that path.
Sounds like a great concept album.
Yeah.
So how does all this amazing work by Dr. Hutchins go out into the world? What did she impact? Where has her work continued on?
Well, there's a couple answers to that. One is, she spent most of the last 40 years of her life working really hard on getting a lot of people to understand and accept the octet instruments and teaching a lot of the best luthiers in the world. And a lot of that acoustics work that she did carried over really strongly into the instruments that we're seeing today. I think you can draw a direct line between the improvement of the what we call the lower grade instruments, they are so much better today than they were, say, in the 1970s. And it's because luthiers have caught on to the fact that science is real, and that, it works. Well, there's a lot of fight against Carleen and her work. There were luthiers who really, really hated her work because they thought she was demystifying Stradivarius, and that it was going to cause the bottom to fall out of the violin market. And of course, it hasn't done that. Those instruments are objects of art, and they're not going to lose their value just because Carleen figured out how to make a great sounding modern instrument. These acoustics of children's instruments, I can't believe the high quality of some of the instruments I'm seeing today coming out of China and Romania. And those were places that she went to teach people. So, I think a lot of that comes right back. And a lot of the interest we see in the octet actually comes from overseas too. I think people are a little less musically stuck in their ways, and the octet is still an oddball. There's only the Consort is the only octet that's got a complete octet right now, and we have a project in New York that plays every few years or so, and we were going to play this fall, and I don't know if that's going to happen because of the pandemic, but right now we're really the only group that's doing this, and we need to get more octets going. So
how many sets of instruments did Carleen make?
Depends on who's asking the question and who's answering it. I count them as 6 and a partial 7.
Okay.
She made 100 octet instruments total, but a lot of those she really liked making the altos. She made a lot of mezzos. She didn't make a lot of contrabasses and basses for obvious reasons. They're giant, and they, like the size of the body of the contrabass violin was her height. So she was 5'2", and that's how tall the instrument itself, just the body of the instrument is. So she didn't make that many of those. So, that's kind of a limiting factor of how many octets she could make. But many of her students made instruments too. So there's what we call second generation instruments, of which this is one, that were made by her other students. So there's a luthier in upstate New York named Bob Spear, and he's made 2 entire octets. There's a luthier in Belgium named Joris Wouters, and he's made an entire octet. And Pio Montanari, who's the caretaker of the Paganini violin, he's made an entire octet. He's in Genoa, Italy. And then we have makers making different instruments all over the world. So there's instruments being made and being played. We just don't have a lot of entire octets yet. I think that's going to be coming. I hope so.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's promising to know. I didn't realize that I knew she was just multi-talented and had, many different areas that she was working in. I didn't realize that she was also training a new generation of luthiers on top of that. That's great to hear that these instruments are still, I assume they're still continuing to be made, or at least there's luthiers who are continuing to produce the pieces based on her teachings. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and some really fantastic luthiers too, And it's interesting because one of the things we found is that every instrument really reflects the personality of the maker. So yeah, there's the physics of the instrument, but there's a little something else that you hear too. Carleen's instruments are like Carleen. They're direct, and they don't take any guff whatsoever. Trying to keep my language clean here. But Bob Spear, he's like this big-hearted, sweet, wonderful gentleman. His instruments sound like his heart. They're these big, arms around you kind of instruments. So yeah.
So what you're saying is you can't just punch the acoustics equations into a CNC machine and churn out a copy.
Oh yeah, you can. Yeah, yeah, you can certainly turn out a copy. I just find that those little touches that because after you put it through the CNC machine, there's handwork that still has to be done to it, and I don't understand exactly why this is, but for some reason you always hear a little something of the personality of that player. Maybe I'm making the whole thing up in my own mind, and I'm hearing something that's not really there, but that's my own observation.
Yeah.
Could be my own insanity coming through.
Well, so on a personal level, I mean, how long has when did you decide I'm starting this thing called the Hutchins Consort, and how did you go about recruiting people to follow you on this odd journey?
Oh, so going back to the 1980s, after I had gotten to play the contrabass violin, which I was just completely enamored with, I really wanted something that sounded like that. And back then, I was primarily an orchestra player, and I was a long-term sub with the Honolulu Symphony, and then when it was the Hawaii Symphony, I was a member of that and of the Honolulu Opera, Hawaii Opera Theater, I guess it's called. But I really wanted that big, beautiful contrabass sound, so I designed an instrument reading her physics books, and I couldn't figure out how to get one of the calculations done properly. So I called her on the phone, and she started giving me little lessons. Not that they ever took, but she started giving me lessons on how to do what I was trying to do over the phone. And then through the process of those conversations, she's mentioned that there was an entire octet that was still at her house in New Jersey. So I thought, wait, wouldn't it be fun if we could put together a little band? And so the next day after that conversation, I had a recording session, and there were some really prominent musicians at that, and I asked them if they wanted to be part of this experiment. And then, to my delight and surprise, they all said yes.
Wow.
Like, it wasn't even a question for any of them. There was no even pause to reflect, is this a good idea or not? They all said yes, thankfully. And that's how the group started. So 2 months later, I was flying to New Jersey and picking up most of the instruments. Although we had to borrow a contrabass from the National Music Museum for the first year. And they were great. They were really great about it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So that was 1999 when everything kind of suddenly coalesced together.
Okay. And you're still going strong, which is pretty amazing.
Well, we're still going anyway. I mean, we haven't played a concert in several months, but neither has anyone else.
Right.
We're going to start live streaming again soon, though. We've been working on trying to up our game enough with the live streaming thing so that we don't lose so much, as we talked about earlier. Whenever you live stream something, you're losing a lot of those overtones. So we're just trying to figure out how we can bring the Consort experience to an at-home audience, because there's nothing like being in the actual room with acoustic instruments, as you well know.
Oh yeah, I agree. And like I mentioned earlier in the episode, we're doing our first live stream concert here from the museum. We're not going to have a live audience, but that's why I'm here today, is to be able to test and dial that in. And it's no easy task, and I hope you guys. I'll pass along whatever experience I learned today. I'm happy to do that, and let's see about getting the Consort, maybe whatever I can help out with, to see that you guys have a successful live stream too. So
greatly appreciated. Thank you.
I know that I was just talking with Peter Sprague the other day, and he's also going with the live streaming, and he had some questions, and we had a nice conversation on what he's doing and his work with that. So it's promising to see all the passion, the desire to continue to play, even though we're stuck in quarantine, or whatever circumstances we have to deal with. It's amazing to see how we're able to kind of pull together and continue to make music. Maybe not how we're used to, but at least continuing to have that drive to push to do that. And it's great to hear that you guys are also heading in that same direction. So I look forward to seeing what happens with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I believe really firmly in the healing power of art and in music, specifically. And I think people are really missing that right now. And so however we can, even if we can't give them the full real experience of being live in the room with us, at least doing something, I think is necessary.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even today. I mean, look, we brought so many people together who wanted to learn about Dr. Hutchins, and it was fun to see this amazing conversation happen on YouTube and on Facebook. And I want to thank everybody who's tuned in today and invited us into your home to learn about this amazing innovator, this amazing luthier and person, and what she's done for instrument making, and having Joe join us. And then I guess, Jonathan, do you have anything further we want to add to the story? Is there anything, a continuation, any other questions we want to explore, any other avenues?
I mean, I just want to kind of touch on how amazing it is that there is still so much to discover about music. That it is such an intuitive human thing that we do so naturally, but we have so much left to learn about it. And, in all different fields. And so, yeah, just the idea that you can take a brilliant mind musically and mathematically and in terms of physics, and apply that to music, and the two they're sort of like they're a match made in heaven. That you never really know where the inspiration is going to come from, but that there is this power. I mean, you guys, you said it so much more eloquently, talking about the power of music. But I think it's just really amazing, and how many disciplines all fit into this very human thing that we're still trying to figure out.
Yeah, I think it's inexhaustible, and I hope it actually remains that way forever.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. I'm confident with so many people out there who are passionate about music and live music and making music, even if you're not a musician. I mean, there's so many people that are open to hearing and trying new things, and not just musicians, but people who make instruments and people who enjoy hearing instruments. So it's exciting to see. Well, I guess without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. We're almost at the hour. Wow. I always love, just finding it's like, oh, wow, we talked for an hour already? Amazing. So Joe McNalley, I want to thank you for being our guest today. Jonathan, I want to thank you for all the great direction you took the conversation. I learned quite a bit. And thanks to our audience today. Thank you for joining us, inviting us into your home again. We are continuing Mom at Home every Wednesday and Friday. I will either be here at the museum or I will be here at my home, welcoming guests and subjects and topics that we hope you find interesting and enlightening. This Friday, I'm really looking forward to this Friday as well. This week has been fun. We have another instrument innovator we're going to be exploring, Emmett Chapman and the Chapman stick. We're not going to have Emmett as a guest, unfortunately. We're actually going to have Tom Griesgraber, who is a San Diego Chapman stick performer and one of the finest stick players that I know, and I know actually quite a number of stick players. There's not a common instrument, but I actually, I know a handful of stick players, and they're all very talented individuals. But Tom Griesgraber has been a kind of an icon in San Diego and one of the more prominent stick players, and has done really just magical things with it. So join us on Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific time. If you can join us live, you can participate in the conversation. We have Tom Griesgraber. We're talking about the Chapman stick. And then I'm going to mention our live concert performance with Carl Verheyen, guitarist with Supertramp. He will be here at the museum, just he and I, and maybe another museum staff helping us out. Obviously, we have to maintain our health and safety standards, social distancing, and all that fun stuff. But he'll be on stage doing a solo show. I'll be producing the audio, so we have total control of the audio, and I'm going to make sure that it sounds good and it looks good, and that we deliver a wonderful concert experience. If you want to get tickets for that show, it's not a public show. We're actually going to be having it's going to be a private link that we will send out to all ticket holders. You can go to our website, museumofmakingmusic.org. Go to the events page, and you'll find the link to Carl Verheyen and how to get access to that link. I think it's super affordable, too. I think it's only $10. So it helps support the museum. We're splitting the proceeds with the artists, and it's our first live concert. We're super excited about it. If you enjoy live concerts here at the museum, it'll be a little bit different bringing that music right to your home, but we are confident that we can present something that you'll enjoy just as much, and it'll be a way for us to all gather together and enjoy live music together with a really stellar artist. Until then, thank you, everyone. Take care. Be good, and I hope to see you Friday. Other than that, see you then.